Everyone thought the CEO of the tech titan, Eleanor Hayes, was dying. The doctors said Zoe had no more than a few months left. Her grandmother, a woman who built an empire from scratch, now watched her world crumble, devastated and desperate. She tried every treatment money could buy, but nothing worked. Nurses came and went from the fortress of glass and steel Eleanor called home, but the girl remained silent, weak, and fading fast. Then, one day, a new driver was hired. He seemed ordinary, quiet, careful, just doing his job. But as the days passed, he noticed things no one else did. He paid attention, asked questions no one dared to ask, and then he found something that changed everything. What he discovered didn't just offer hope. It uncovered a secret that had been hidden for years, a lie wrapped in white coats and empty promises. Eleanor Hayes, at 67, was a legend. A Black woman who had risen from humble beginnings to the top of the tech world, known for her sharp mind and relentless leadership. But after the tragic and sudden death of her husband in a plane crash, everything changed. She stepped down from boards, sold off stock, and moved into a vast, silent mansion far from the frantic pulse of the city. The place was a masterpiece of modern architecture, filled with priceless art and cutting-edge technology. But it felt like a mausoleum, empty of life, full of echoes. Eleanor rarely spoke to anyone. She kept to herself, avoiding the outside world. Her only focus now was her granddaughter, Zoe, whom she had raised as her own daughter since her parents died in the same crash. Zoe had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer when she was still very young. The treatment was brutal on her small body. Her hair fell out, and she became terribly weak. Eleanor stayed by her side every day, caring for her, trying to make her feel better. But even though she was always there, Zoe didn't talk much. She remained quiet, distant, and often stared at nothing, as if she were lost in a fog no one else could see. Eleanor tried to bring happiness back into Zoe's life. She spent fortunes hiring the best doctors and therapists. She brought in art teachers, music instructors, and even animal therapists to see if any of them could get a reaction from her. She bought books, toys, and anything Zoe showed even the slightest interest in. But nothing worked. Zoe didn't smile. She didn't play. She didn't talk. Sometimes, she would just sit for hours in her room or by the window, a small silhouette against the immense glass. Eleanor felt powerless. She wanted to fix everything, like she did in business. But this was different. Zoe wasn't just sick. She seemed unreachable. No matter what she did, she couldn't bring the light back into her eyes. The silence between them was heavy. Eleanor didn't know how to break through it. She missed the little girl who used to laugh and ask questions. Now, she was like a shadow of her former self. Every morning, Eleanor followed a strict routine. She would wake up early, oversee Zoe's breakfast, and check her medication. Nurses came daily to help with her care, but Eleanor insisted on being part of everything. She monitored her health closely, keeping a notebook of her reactions and progress.
Hi. If you've watched this far, thank you very much. Comment on which city you're watching from, so I know you're enjoying the story.
The house was always immaculate, meals were always on time, and every detail was under control. She thought that maybe by being organized, she could keep the situation from getting worse. But even though everything around them was perfectly managed, nothing felt right. The silence in the house was louder than any noise. Eleanor often blamed herself for everything. She believed that if she had done something differently, maybe her husband and son would still be alive, and maybe Zoe wouldn't be suffering so much. She remembered the happy days when their family was complete. Those memories hurt now. She kept old family photos in a drawer, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them. They reminded her of what she had lost. She carried the guilt like a weight on her shoulders. Ethan Scott, at 30, had been through something very painful a few years earlier. He had lost his younger sister, Sophia, in a car accident he felt he could have prevented. Guilt was a constant companion, and nothing in his life felt the same. He quit his old job as a mechanic and moved to a new city looking for a fresh start. Every corner of his old neighborhood reminded him of Sophia's laugh and his own failure to protect her. Ethan didn't talk much to others and spent his days in a self-imposed silence. One morning, while browsing jobs online, he saw an ad looking for a private driver for a residence. The job didn't ask for a specific experience, just someone patient, discreet, and responsible. Ethan felt something pull him toward it. Maybe it was the promise of a quiet environment, a place where he could just drive and get lost in his thoughts. Without overthinking it, he applied. When Ethan arrived at the mansion, the first thing he noticed was how quiet everything was. The house was immense and well kept, but it didn't feel warm or welcoming. It was too clean, too silent. Eleanor Hayes met him at the front door. She didn't smile, but she spoke in a firm, polite voice. She explained that the job wasn't like working in a normal house. Her granddaughter Zoe was very sick, and privacy was paramount. She didn't expect much from Ethan at first, just that he be punctual, discreet, and keep a respectful distance. Ethan accepted the terms and moved into a small apartment on the back of the property. The other staff members didn't stay long. They came and went quickly, saying the job was too emotionally draining. But Ethan didn't feel overwhelmed. He was used to pain and silence. Something about the house reminded him of how he felt inside. Calm on the outside, hurting on the inside.
3. It wasn't just physical weakness. There was an emotional emptiness, too. Ethan recognized that kind of silence. It was the same kind of emptiness he'd felt since Sophia was gone. He didn't see Zoe as just a girl who needed help. He saw someone who had lost something inside, just like he had. Ethan began to make small, quiet efforts to connect. He didn't talk much. Instead, he tried to use actions. He would leave a small piece of chocolate on the back seat after a particularly difficult appointment. One afternoon, he put on a soft classical music station and noticed in the rearview mirror that Zoe closed her eyes, almost as if she were relaxing. It was a small reaction, but it was something. Eleanor noticed the difference. At first, she said nothing, but she paid attention. Unlike other employees, Ethan never tried to impress her or ask too many questions. He wasn't overly cheerful, and he didn't act like he could fix things. He just did his work and treated Zoe with a quiet respect. Eleanor felt something shift in the air. Ethan's presence wasn't loud, but it filled a space that had been empty for too long. One evening, she passed by Zoe's door and saw the girl holding the empty wrapper from the chocolate Ethan had left. It was the first time in months she had picked something up on her own. That night, Eleanor called Ethan into her office and thanked him. Not with big words, just a simple thank you that meant a lot. She didn't ask him to do more. She just told him to keep being himself. That was enough. The pain Ethan carried helped him see Zoe differently. Not as a patient, but as a person. He didn't try to fix Zoe's sadness. He simply stayed nearby, gently reminding her that she wasn't alone. Ethan had been working at the mansion for a few weeks. His days were mostly the same. He drove, he waited, he kept the car pristine, and he kept himself busy without making noise. He had gotten used to the quiet environment. It was almost normal to him now. One afternoon, Ethan was helping the nurse bring Zoe from the car into the house. The girl seemed weaker than usual that day. As the nurse settled her into the wheelchair, her sleeve rode up a little, revealing a small needle mark on her arm. Suddenly, Zoe flinched and said something in a low voice. Ethan froze when he heard the words, "Stop, it hurts, Sophia." His mind stopped. He didn't say anything right away. He was processing what had just happened. Zoe had said his sister's name. That moment didn't feel like an accident. Ethan stood very still, unsure of what to do.
Zoe's voice had sounded afraid, as if the pain she felt was more than just physical. Ethan looked at her gently, but Zoe didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the floor, clutching the edge of her blanket. The nurse didn't seem to notice, or pretended not to. "It's okay, dear, it's all over," she said in a professional but cold voice. Ethan didn't ask questions, didn't push for an explanation, but inside his mind was racing. Zoe had never said much before. She had always been quiet, barely reacting. This time was different. It wasn't just his sister's name that stood out. It was the tone. There was emotion behind it, a kind of fear or memory. Ethan didn't know what to think, but he knew something was wrong. Zoe's reaction wasn't just about the injection. It was about something else, something Ethan didn't understand yet, but he felt the need to find out. After leaving Zoe in her room, Ethan walked slowly down the hall. His steps were automatic. His thoughts were elsewhere. He replayed that moment in his head over and over. He thought about how Zoe had said the name Sophia, as if it were part of something from the past.
Ethan had lost his sister, so he understood how powerful a name could be. But Zoe had never met Sophia. Was it possible she was confused? Or was it something deeper? Ethan began to feel a strange unease. Something about the situation didn't fit. The way Zoe had reacted was so specific, as if she were reliving a moment. A silent doubt began to form inside him, a doubt that wouldn't go away easily. In the days that followed, Ethan paid closer attention. He didn't act differently on the outside, but his eyes were sharper now. He noticed how Zoe avoided certain kinds of touch. Sometimes she flinched when someone walked too close behind her. Other times she became very quiet when the doctor, Dr. Marcus Gorn, entered the room. None of these things were dramatic or obvious, but when added together, they made Ethan feel uneasy. One evening, while cleaning the interior of the car, Ethan found a small glass vial that had rolled under the passenger seat. It was nearly empty. The label was partially torn, but he could see Zoe's name and a series of letters and numbers he didn't recognize. A chill ran down his spine. Without a second thought, he put the vial in his pocket. He didn't want to cause trouble, but the questions were growing louder in his head. Why did Zoe's history seem so empty? Why did Eleanor always avoid certain topics? Something was being hidden. He was sure of it now. From that moment on, Ethan couldn't ignore his feelings anymore. He started looking for little clues, not because he wanted to invade anyone's privacy, but because he felt a responsibility. He had come to that house just to work, but now he cared deeply for Zoe. That one name, Sophia, had changed everything. It had opened a door inside Ethan's heart and mind. He knew what it meant to lose someone. But Zoe's pain seemed different. It wasn't just loss. It was confusion, fear, and maybe something darker. Ethan didn't want to jump to conclusions. He didn't think badly of Eleanor, but he needed to understand the truth. Something inside him was pushing him to uncover what was really happening in that house. He didn't have a clear plan. All he had was that single moment, that single name from Zoe that had planted a silent, growing doubt. Ethan had the vial in his pocket for 2 days. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't want to cause trouble, but he also couldn't ignore what he felt. That feeling that something was terribly wrong was stronger than any fear of losing his job. He waited until his day off. He didn't want to make any mistakes, so he went straight to someone he trusted. His cousin Daniel, a pharmacist who worked at a small private clinic. Daniel had known Ethan for years, and when Ethan explained everything, he agreed to send the contents of the vial for analysis at a friendly lab. Ethan felt nervous, but also certain he had done the right thing. He needed to know the truth, no matter what.
2 days later, Daniel called back. His voice was serious, almost cold. "Ethan, we got the results," he said. "You were right to be concerned." Daniel explained that the vial contained a powerful drug used in rare adult treatments, not something recommended for children, especially not in the dose found. It was 3 times the amount considered safe even in emergency situations.
The substance could cause extreme fatigue, damage to internal organs, and suppress normal brain function in a child. Ethan sat down, shaking. He felt sick to his stomach. He couldn't believe Zoe had been receiving this for so long. Daniel continued, explaining that the drug wasn't illegal, but it was classified for special cases only and required strict oversight that was clearly not happening. Ethan thanked him and hung up. His hands were cold. He had confirmation now. This wasn't just about over-medication. It was about something profoundly wrong. Someone had made decisions that put Zoe in serious danger, and Ethan knew exactly who. The name on all the prescriptions was the same, Dr. Marcus Thorne. He was the one Eleanor had trusted since Zoe's diagnosis. Ethan remembered the man. He was always polite but distant. He spoke in complicated terms, making it hard for anyone to question him. Now Ethan couldn't help but wonder how many people had been fooled by him. He took the report straight to Eleanor. He didn't want to hide anything. He sat across from her in the office and told her everything. Eleanor read the report slowly, her face growing pale. At first she was silent. Then she spoke in a voice that didn't sound like her own. "I trusted him," she said. "He promised he could save her." "Eleanor, we need to know more," Ethan said, his voice firm. For the first time, Eleanor nodded. She didn't look like a business mogul. She looked like a grandmother who had been tricked. Together, they started digging into the doctor's background. Eleanor used her contacts to access old records, and Ethan searched online forums and news archives. It didn't take long to find what they feared. Dr. Thorne had already been involved in investigations years earlier. There were reports of questionable treatments and legal disputes with families. In one case, a boy had developed heart problems after receiving similar medications under Thorne's care. The case had been closed quietly, with no charges filed. But the signs were all there. Ethan's anger grew. How could someone like this still be practicing medicine? Eleanor found more files, more stories, more families who had suffered. Some had tried to sue, but many had given up after long court battles. Reading their stories was painful. Zoe wasn't the only one.
Ethan and Eleanor were now certain. This wasn't just one mistake. It was part of a pattern, a history of harm disguised as treatment. As the evidence grew, so did their sense of betrayal. Eleanor felt the full weight of her mistake. She had believed in Dr. Thorne completely. She had followed every recommendation, thinking it would save her granddaughter. Now she realized she had been blind. Ethan didn't blame her. He knew how fear and desperation could cloud a person's judgment, but that didn't make what happened any less serious. Eleanor stopped taking calls. She spent hours reviewing documents, searching names, and contacting families. Some were open to talking, others didn't want to revisit the past. But each story added more pain and more fuel to their mission. They weren't just angry, they were determined. In the midst of all this, Zoe remained unaware of the details. Ethan and Eleanor kept things calm around her. But inside, everything had changed. They had made a decision. They would not stop until Dr. Thorne was exposed. They began preparing a case. Daniel agreed to testify if needed. Other families were slowly joining in. A lawyer got involved. What started with a medicine vial had now turned into a real fight for justice. Ethan felt stronger than ever. His role in Zoe's life had gone beyond care. It had become protection. Eleanor, once lost in guilt and denial, now stood beside him. The betrayal hurt, but the new purpose gave them strength. They had been fooled by a man in a white coat, but now they had the truth, and with it, a reason to act. It was no longer just about Zoe. It was about ensuring no other child would suffer the same way. Eleanor and Ethan had everything they needed. They organized the medical reports, documents, testimonies, and drug lab results into a full case. With the help of the lawyer and support from some of the other families affected by Dr. Thorne's actions, they took everything to the district attorney's office. The prosecutor listened carefully and promised to begin a formal investigation. Not long after, more information came to light. Dr. Thorne was not just careless. He had a connection with certain pharmaceutical companies.
He was receiving payments to test new, unapproved medications on vulnerable patients. Children like Zoe had been used as part of those secret drug trials. The story was shocking. As more evidence appeared, the media began to take interest. News channels and websites reported on the case. Public pressure grew fast. People wanted answers. But not everyone wanted the truth to come out. Soon after the case gained attention, the problem started. One morning, a news article appeared online, accusing Eleanor of being an absentee grandmother who was ignoring Zoe's care. Another headline suggested that Ethan had tricked his way into the house and was manipulating the child for attention. They were lies, but they spread quickly. Eleanor received strange emails saying she was a terrible guardian. Ethan found printed notes under his car's windshield wiper telling him to stay quiet. Anonymous text messages told them to drop the case or face consequences.
Eleanor was furious, but Ethan stayed calm. "We expected this," he said. "If they're scared, it means we're doing something right." Neither of them thought about giving up. They had come too far already. While the legal battle raged on, something beautiful began to happen inside the mansion. Zoe, who had once been weak, silent, and always tired, started to change. She was still fragile, but her energy was better. She started drawing again, often asking Ethan to sit beside her while she colored. She laughed, sometimes not loudly, but it was real. Her eyes looked brighter, more awake. She even asked to go out into the garden. These moments gave Eleanor and Ethan strength. They still had a long legal road ahead, but inside the house, there was hope. The walls that had once held silence now echoed with soft voices, with footsteps, with music in the background. Life was returning to a place that had once felt frozen. There were still hard days. Court meetings were long. Some people still believed the lies. Eleanor struggled with guilt. "I should have seen it sooner," she would repeat. Ethan reminded her that what mattered was what they were doing now. They were no longer powerless. They were acting, speaking up, changing something. Even Zoe noticed the difference. One night, as Ethan tucked her in, Zoe said, "You and Grandma are brave." Ethan smiled and held her hand. It was the kind of sentence that stayed with him. Eleanor and Ethan had both changed. They were no longer just individuals trying to survive grief or guilt. They had become a team, stronger together than alone. The fight wasn't just legal, it was emotional, personal, and deep. They were facing powerful people, but they had something more powerful pushing them forward. The love for a child who had once been forgotten and now had a voice through them. By the time the case hit national television, Eleanor and Ethan had already accepted that their lives would never be the same. But they didn't mind. Their goal was justice. They wanted answers, accountability, and above all, change. Every time they walked into a courtroom or gave another statement, they carried Zoe in their hearts. After months of investigation, the case against Dr. Marcus Thorne finally reached the courtroom. The prosecutor had gathered enough evidence to arrest him, and he was taken into custody while the trial was prepared. As the trial began, news of the case continued to spread. More families started to come forward. One by one, parents stepped into the courtroom telling their own painful stories. The pattern was clear. Dr. Thorne had been using experimental drugs on children without their full knowledge or consent. Ethan was one of the first witnesses to testify. He walked to the stand calmly. His voice was steady as he told the court how he found the vial, how he contacted his pharmacist cousin,
and how the tests revealed dangerous substances. He explained Zoe's condition, her slow recovery after the medications were stopped, and how he uncovered Dr. Thorne's past. He simply told the truth in clear, simple words.
Eleanor followed not long after. When it was her turn, she stood before the court and admitted she had made a terrible mistake. She said she had trusted too much and questioned too little. Her honesty earned respect from everyone watching. She admitted her failure to protect her granddaughter sooner and shared how guilt had consumed her for years. She said that if it weren't for Ethan, she might have never seen the truth. Zoe did not appear in court, but her presence was still felt. During the third day of the trial, one of her drawings was presented as evidence. It was a simple picture, a little girl standing between an older woman and a younger man holding hands. The girl had no hair, but she was smiling. Underneath, Zoe had written, "I feel safe now." The courtroom was quiet as the judge looked at the drawing. It wasn't used to prove medical details, but it became a symbol of what the trial was about: healing, truth, and the need to protect children. The final part of the trial came quickly. After hearing all the testimonies and reviewing the documents, the jury took only 2 days to reach a decision. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom was full. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, there was no loud celebration. Instead, there was silence, followed by deep breaths and quiet tears. The judge sentenced Dr. Thorne to a long prison term and announced that the medical board had begun reviewing all patient safety regulations. Back at the mansion, the mood was completely different from how it had been months before. The house that once felt cold and distant now felt warm and peaceful. Zoe was drawing again. She spent time in the garden, laughing with Ethan and asking questions about everything. Eleanor joined them often, no longer distant or quiet. They talked about school, future trips, and simple things. Ethan stayed, not as an employee, but as family. The trial was over, but their lives were just beginning, a new chapter. Years passed quickly. Zoe became a teenager, then a young adult. Her passion for art remained, and she decided to study it seriously. She was accepted into an art school with a scholarship. Ethan helped her pack her bags, and Eleanor drove her to campus. Though it was hard to say goodbye, they both knew Zoe was ready. Several years later, Zoe sent invitations to everyone she loved. She was holding her first professional art exhibition. It would feature pieces that showed her personal journey through sickness, fear, recovery, and love. On opening night, Zoe stood at the front of the room and gave a speech. Her voice was clear, her words thoughtful. "People think my strength came from medicine," she said. "But the truth is, my real strength came from the heart of a man who refused to look away and from the courage of a woman who learned to fight again. They loved me. When I was hard to love, they stayed. They became the light I followed." The room fell silent as Zoe finished her speech. The audience stood and clapped. Ethan wiped his eyes, and Eleanor smiled with pride. It wasn't just an art show. It was a celebration of life, healing, and love. Zoe's past would always be a part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She had taken it, shaped it, and turned it into something beautiful. It was no longer just a memory of pain. It was a message of hope. The little girl who once lived in silence had become a woman who knew how to live. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.